The massive space station hung in the void like an ornate chandelier, its gleaming spires and reinforced domes catching starlight from a dozen nearby systems. Galactic Combat Academy, the most prestigious military training facility in the known universe, rotated slowly against the backdrop of the Milky Way's Orion arm, projecting an aura of superiority that was as intentional as it was effective. The latest transport shuttle docked at the Academy's central hangar with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, 23 new recruits from across the galaxy prepared to disembark. Most shuffled nervously, adjusting exoskeletons, respiratory apparatus, or whatever specialized equipment their particular species required. Near the back of the transport, Sergeant Nathan Nate Carter sat motionless, taking measured breaths despite the artificial atmosphere that never quite felt right in his lungs. He was the only human on board. Galactic Combat Academy welcomes all species, announced the automated system in 17 different languages. Please proceed to Processing Station Alpha for orientation and assignment. As the airlock doors opened, Nate stood and straightened his Earth Combat Force uniform. At 6 feet tall, he wasn't particularly imposing, especially not next to the towering Tisanthian recruit whose silhouette blocked much of the light from the hangar. Yet there was a quiet confidence in his movements, a disciplined economy of motion that spoke of extensive training. "Look at that," whispered an aeroplan recruit to her companion, chitinous mandibles clicking softly. "They actually sent a human. Should have saved the fuel," the companion replied, compound eyes swiveling to assess Nate. "Humans are Class C at best. Too fragile for real combat situations." Nate pretended not to hear, though his enhanced audio implants picked up every word. He'd expected this. Earth's status in the galactic community was precarious at best, viewed as a backwater planet with unremarkable inhabitants. His mission here wasn't just personal, it was diplomatic. Processing Station Alpha gleamed with holographic interfaces and scanning equipment. A tall, obsidian-skinned officer with 4 arms stood rigidly beside the entrance, scrolling through personnel files on a transparent tablet. His name badge identified him as Lieutenant Kroll, and the contemptuous twist of his lipless mouth told Nate everything he needed to know about the officer's opinion of Earth. Sergeant Nathan Carter. Kroll's voice was unexpectedly melodious, contrasting with his severe appearance. Earth's contribution to this training cycle. He pronounced Earth as if it were a mild obscenity. "Reporting is ordered, sir," Nate replied crisply, coming to attention. Lieutenant Kroll's upper set of eyes narrowed, while the lower pair continued scanning the file. "Says here you're from Earth's Special Tactical Division. Impressive by human standards, I suppose." Several nearby recruits snickered. A gelatinous morphoplasm recruit rippled with amusement, its translucent body briefly taking on the crude shape of a human figure before collapsing back into its natural state. "We keep a balanced representation from all recognized galactic societies," Kroll continued, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Even the developmental ones." He gestured toward a narrow corridor. "Quarters assignment is through there. You're in Block H. H for human. Convenient, isn't it? I'm sure you'll find it accommodating." Nate nodded once, keeping his expression neutral. "Thank you, sir." As he walked away, Kroll called after him, "Oh, and Sergeant, try not to break anything, including yourself." More laughter followed Nate down the corridor. Block H turned out to be the farthest residential section from the Academy's central facilities, a not-so-subtle statement about humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. The room itself was spartanly furnished. A sleep platform, hygiene unit, and small workstation. On Earth, it would have been considered austere military quarters. Here was probably luxury compared to what some species required. Nate stored his minimal belongings and activated the room's interface. A holographic display appeared, showing the Academy's layout, training schedule, and facility regulations. He had just begun memorizing evacuation routes when notification chimed. "Attention all recruits," announced a stern voice. "Mandatory assembly in the central atrium in 30 minutes. Commandant Ravok will address the incoming class." Precisely 28 minutes later, Nate stood at parade rest among the assembled recruits in the central atrium. The vast chamber rose at least 12 stories high, its transparent ceiling offering a spectacular view of distant stars and nearby celestial bodies. The architecture was deliberately imposing. High ceilings, massive columns, and ostentatious displays of galactic military accomplishments. The air in the atrium stirred as a new figure entered. Commandant Ravok was even taller than Lieutenant Kroll, with similar obsidian skin that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the chamber's light. Unlike Kroll, however, Ravok possessed only 2 arms and eyes, though his limbs were corded with visible muscle. He wore a uniform adorned with symbols of rank and achievement that Nate couldn't fully interpret. Recruits, Ravok's voice boomed without any apparent amplification. Welcome to the Galactic Combat Academy. You represent 23 species from 17 solar systems across this arm of the galaxy. Some of you come from warrior cultures with proud lineages stretching back millennia. Others, his gaze swept briefly over Nate, represent newer additions to our galactic community. Nate maintained his stance, expression impassive. You will be tested beyond your imagined limits, Ravok continued. You will face conditions designed to break you, reshape you, and forge you into warriors worthy of defending your respective worlds. The galaxy is vast and largely unexplored. The threats we face evolve constantly. Only the strongest, most adaptable fighters earn the right to call themselves graduates of this academy. Ravok paced before them, hands clasped behind his back. Our training methods have been refined over centuries. We know the physiological thresholds of every species represented here. We know what you can endure and what you cannot. Again, his gaze lingered momentarily on Nate. Training begins at first cycle tomorrow. Dismissed. As the assembly dispersed, Nate found himself standing near a massive Tisanthian recruit, the same one he'd noticed on the transport. Up close, the being was even more impressive, nearly 8 feet tall with a hide that resembled polished granite, rippling with muscles adapted to a high-gravity homeworld. You are the human, the Tisanthian stated flatly. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Sergeant Nate Carter, Nate replied, offering a respectful nod rather than attempting a handshake that would likely crush his bones. Burke, the Tisanthian, thumped his chest once. My world has 3 times Earth's gravity. Your kind would be crushed there, unable to even crawl like infants. Sounds challenging, Nate said mildly. Burke made a sound that might have been a laugh. Your species is a curiosity here. Nothing more. With that, he turned and walked away, each footstep leaving subtle impressions in the atrium's supposedly indestructible flooring. A slender aeroplan recruit sidled up next to Nate, her iridescent exoskeleton catching the light. Don't mind Berg, she said. Tisanthians are all muscle, minimal diplomacy. And aeroplans? Nate asked. We're known for speed and precision. She executed a lightning-fast movement that Nate's eyes could barely track. I'm Zyra, 2nd-generation spaceborn, if that means anything to you. Nice to meet you, Nate replied, genuinely pleased to encounter someone not immediately dismissive of him. Word of advice, human, Zyra said, leaning closer. Watch yourself around Lieutenant Kroll. He has a reputation for testing new recruits in unofficial ways, especially those he considers beneath academy standards. Before Nate could respond, Zyra darted away, moving with the characteristic quickness of her species. Her warning, however, lingered in Nate's thoughts as he returned to his quarters. In a monitoring room 3 levels above the recruits' living quarters, Lieutenant Kroll stood with 2 junior officers, reviewing holographic displays of the new arrivals. 23 species, Kroll muttered, and they send us a human. Might as well have sent a training dummy. The Earth government was quite insistent on inclusion, replied one of the junior officers. Political considerations. Politics, Kroll spat the word. This is a combat academy, not a diplomatic forum. He expanded the display, showing Nate's quarters. Sergeant Nathan Carter, Special Tactical Division. supposed to be one of their elite soldiers. He laughed. Let's see how elite he really is. He manipulated controls on a nearby console. Their file says humans evolved in approximately 1G conditions and can briefly tolerate up to 3G in specialized circumstances with proper support equipment. Sir, the second junior officer questioned. What are you doing? Just a small welcoming gift for our human guest. Kroll replied with a predatory smile. Nothing in the regulations prevents customizing environmental conditions for optimal training outcomes. He completed the adjustment. There. His quarters are now operating at double Earth gravity, 2G. Let's see how the fragile human handles that. Sir, without prior conditioning. He's supposed to be special forces. Kroll cut him off. If he can't handle a little gravity adjustment, he has no business at this academy. He closed the display, monitored his vitals. If he actually starts dying, reset to standard. Otherwise, let's give Earth's finest a proper welcome. Nate entered his quarters after completing a self-guided tour of accessible academy areas. The moment the door sealed behind him, he felt it, the sudden, crushing weight. His knees buckled slightly before military discipline took over. Every movement became deliberate as the artificial gravity pressed down on him. He didn't panic. Instead, he carefully made his way to the room's console and checked the environmental settings. The display confirmed what he already suspected. Gravity had been adjusted to 2G, twice Earth normal. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. So this was Lieutenant Kroll's unofficial testing. Zyra's warning had come just in time. Nate knew he was being monitored. The psychological aspect of this test was as important as the physical one. Breaking under pressure, literally, in this case, would only confirm their low estimation of human capabilities. He straightened his spine with effort and reached for the console again. But instead of reducing the gravity to normal Earth settings, he did something unexpected. He increased it to 3G. The crushing pressure intensified immediately. Nate's muscles strained, and his breathing became more labored. But he remained standing, forcing himself to take several steps across the room to prove it wasn't a momentary display of bravado. Then, as if the triple gravity were merely an inconvenience, he lowered himself to the floor and began a set of push-ups. 1, 2, 3. Each repetition was excruciating, but his form remained perfect. In the monitoring room, alarms blared as the system registered the gravity change. Lieutenant Kroll stared at the display in disbelief. What is he doing? He demanded. Did he malfunction the controls? No, sir, the junior officer replied, checking the logs. He deliberately increased the gravity to 3G. Impossible, Kroll hissed. He should be pinned to the floor. Yet the visual feed clearly showed Nate performing push-ups under triple Earth gravity, his movements slow but controlled. Heart rate elevated but within sustainable parameters, reported the second officer. Oxygen saturation normal. He's adapting. Switch to thermal imaging, Kroll ordered. The display changed, showing Nate's heat signature. There were no signs of hidden technology or gravity-negating devices. The human was enduring the crushing force through sheer physical conditioning. Send this feed to Commandant Rayvok, Kroll said quietly. It appears we may have underestimated Earth's representative. By the time he'd completed 20 push-ups, Nate's uniform was soaked with sweat, but his expression remained determined. He rose to his feet with deliberate slowness and walked to his bunk, each step a testament to years of specialized training that the Academy knew nothing about. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. News of the gravity incident spread through the Academy like a quantum wave, impossible to contain. By the time training officially began the next morning, every recruit and most instructors had heard some version of the story. The human had not only withstood double gravity, but had voluntarily increased it to triple and proceeded to exercise. When Nate entered the primary training hall, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with greater intensity. He ignored the stares and whispers, focusing instead on the day's schedule displayed on his personal device. First up, environmental adaptation training. The massive chamber had been divided into sections, each simulating different planetary conditions. Instructors directed recruits to areas designed to challenge their particular physiologies. Lieutenant Kroll stood at the control station, his forearms manipulating holographic interfaces with practiced efficiency. When he spotted Nate, his upper eyes narrowed. "Sergeant Carter," he called out, "since you seem to enjoy gravitational challenges, you'll begin in Simulation Zone 6. He gestured toward an area marked with warning symbols. High gravity combined with temperature fluctuations. Let's see if last night's performance was a fluke. Several recruits exchanged glances. Zone 6 was typically reserved for species naturally evolved for extreme conditions, like the Tasanthians. Sending a human there first was tantamount to sabotage. Nate offered a crisp, "Yes, sir," and proceeded to the designated zone. As he crossed the threshold, gravity increased to 2.5 G while the temperature rapidly rose to nearly 40 degrees Celsius. The combination of heat and pressure was designed to stress multiple physiological systems simultaneously. To everyone's surprise, perhaps even Nate's, though he didn't show it, he adapted quickly. His movements became more economical, his breathing pattern shifted, and he began completing the assigned obstacle course with methodical precision. From a viewing platform above, Commandant Ravok observed with growing interest. "Explain this," he demanded of the Academy's xenobiologist who stood beside him. "I cannot, Commandant," admitted the scientist, a willowy cerebral with an oversized cranium. "According to our database, humans evolved on a temperate world with standard gravity. They have no natural adaptations for these conditions." "Then how is he doing this?" Ravok gestured toward Nate, who was now lifting weighted spheres designed for species with twice the muscle density of humans. "Either our information about humans is incorrect," the xenobiologist replied, "or this particular specimen has undergone extensive modifications or training beyond anything we've documented." "Find out which," Ravok ordered. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." Down in Simulation Zone 6, Nate completed the course in a respectable, though not record-breaking time. He exited the zone drenched in sweat, but otherwise showing no signs of distress. Several recruits stared openly now, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by curiosity or, in some cases, wariness. Lieutenant Kroll's expression had turned from contemptuous to calculating. "Impressive adaptation, Sergeant," he acknowledged, though the words seemed forced. "Let's see how you handle low-temperature environments next." Throughout that first day, Nate was subjected to a series of increasingly demanding scenarios: freezing temperatures, toxic atmosphere chambers, with appropriate breathing apparatus, underwater combat simulations, and vacuum exposure drills. In each case, he performed not just adequately, but well above expectations for his species classification. By the end of the training cycle, even the most skeptical instructors had taken notice. The human was unexpected. That evening, in the Academy's Communal Nutrition Center, Nate sat alone at a table designed for humanoid species. He methodically consumed the bland protein compounds that the facility's systems had determined were compatible with human physiology, ignoring the occasional stares from other recruits. His solitude didn't last long. Zyra, the aeroplan he'd met earlier, approached with her tray of specialized nutrient gel. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, mandibles clicking in what he'd come to recognize as her species' version of a smile. "You're the most interesting person in the room right now." Nate gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Be my guest." "So," she said as she settled her slender, insectoid form onto the chair, "triple gravity. Huh? That's quite the statement." "Word travels fast," Nate observed. "Faster than light in this place." Her compound eyes glittered with amusement. "Kroll's face when you completed the high-gravity course today. Priceless. I thought his second set of eyes might pop out." Despite himself, Nate smiled. Not what he expected, not what anyone expected. She leaned forward. "You've got everyone asking, what else can a human do?" Before Nate could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Burke, the Tasanthian, loomed over them, his massive form blocking the overhead lights. "Human," he rumbled. You train on a high-gravity world before coming here. It wasn't a question, but Nate answered anyway. No, Earth is approximately 1G, as your databases indicate. Burke's rocky features contorted in what might have been confusion or skepticism. Then how did you withstand triple gravity? My people evolved over millions of years to handle such forces. We adapted, Nate said simply. We? Zyra picked up on the plural. So it's not just you. Nate cursed his slip. He'd revealed more than intended. Human special forces undergo extensive conditioning, he said, keeping his tone casual. Part of our training includes gravity adjustment chambers. Another recruit joined them, the morphoplasm he'd seen earlier. Its gelatinous body flowed into a roughly humanoid shape as it settled at their table. I'm Renu. It introduced itself, voice bubbling from a temporarily formed speech orifice. What the Desanthian wants to know but is too proud to ask is, are all humans like you? Or are you an outlier? An excellent question, and one Nate had been carefully instructed to deflect. The truth about Earth's military preparedness program was classified at the highest levels. I'm just a soldier who takes training seriously, he replied with a shrug that belied the careful calculation behind his words. Burke made a rumbling sound that might have been skepticism. Tomorrow is combat training. Gravity tricks won't save you there, human. With that ominous pronouncement, the Desanthian moved away, his heavy footfalls resonating through the floor. Charming, isn't he? Zyra commented. But he's right about one thing. Combat training is where the instructors separate the elites from the rest. Species advantages become very apparent. Looking forward to it, Nate said, and found that he meant it. Physical adaptation tests were one thing, but tactical combat was where he could truly show what humans were capable of, without revealing too much about their specialized training. That night, Nate returned to his quarters to find the gravity still set at 3G. Either the system had maintained its settings, or someone had decided to continue testing him. Regardless, he welcomed the challenge. His body needed to acclimate fully if he was to maintain his performance level. As he began his nightly conditioning routine, modified for the high-gravity environment, he reflected on the day's events. He'd made an impression, certainly, but had also drawn more attention than his mission parameters had specified. The balancing act would be difficult. Demonstrate human capabilities without revealing the full extent of Earth's military advancements. For decades, humanity had been classified as a Class C species in the galactic military hierarchy. Physically unimpressive, technologically developing, and strategically unremarkable. This designation had initially frustrated Earth's leaders, but they'd eventually recognized its advantages. Being underestimated provided opportunities that respect did not. Behind the facade of compliance with galactic standards, Earth had been preparing. Special Forces soldiers like Nate underwent extreme conditioning regimens, genetic optimizations, and neural enhancements, all carefully designed to remain undetectable by standard galactic scanning technology. The goal wasn't to intimidate, but to surprise if necessary, and to gather intelligence, which was Nate's primary mission at the Academy. As he completed his final set of high-gravity resistance exercises, a notification chimed on his console. A message from Commandant Ravok. Sergeant Carter, my office. 0600 hours tomorrow, before standard training commencement. So much for flying under the radar. The next morning, Nate stood at attention before Commandant Ravok's desk, back straight despite the standard gravity that now felt strangely insufficient after hours in his enhanced quarters. Ravok studied him silently for nearly a minute, obsidian features unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Sergeant Carter, your performance yesterday has raised questions. Sir, Nate kept his response neutral. Our intelligence on human physiological capabilities appears to be outdated. Ravok tapped a crystalline object on his desk, causing a holographic display to materialize between them. It showed Nate's performance metrics from the previous day, alongside the expected parameters for human capabilities. The disparity was significant. Would you care to explain this discrepancy, Sergeant? Ravok's tone was measured, neither accusatory nor impressed. With respect, Commandant, The data you have may reflect average human capabilities rather than those of specialized military personnel, Nate replied carefully. Earth's Special Tactical Division selects for exceptional physical attributes and enhances them through intensive training. Training alone doesn't explain these results, Ravok countered, especially the gravity adaptation. Nate had prepared for this line of questioning. Humans have always trained in variable gravity conditions, sir. Our early space programs exposed astronauts to high G forces during launch and zero G in orbit. We've refined those methods over generations. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Ravok leaned back, fingers steepled. I've served in the galactic military for over 60 cycles, Sergeant. I've encountered representatives from hundreds of species. I know when I'm being given a partial explanation. Nate remained silent. Denial would only reinforce suspicion. However, Ravok continued after a moment, I also recognize that every species has its secrets, particularly regarding military capabilities. A grim smile crossed his features. It would be hypocritical to demand complete transparency when we ourselves practice strategic ambiguity. Relief flickered briefly through Nate before his training reasserted control over his expression. Your presence here has certainly made this training cycle more interesting, Ravok concluded. I look forward to seeing how you perform in the combat exercises. He made a dismissive gesture. You're ordered to participate fully in all training modules, Sergeant. Well, nothing back. That's an explicit command. Yes, sir. Nate responded crisply. Dismissed. As the door sealed behind Nate, Ravok activated a secure communication channel to Earth's military liaison. The human sergeant wasn't the only one gathering intelligence in this exchange. The combat training facility was a vast arena with modular sections that could be reconfigured to simulate different battlefields. Today, it had been arranged as an urban combat zone with structures of various heights and materials, interspersed with obstacles and strategic cover points. Lieutenant Kroll stood on an elevated platform, addressing the assembled recruits. Combat efficiency is the ultimate measure of a warrior, he announced. Today's exercise will assess your tactical decision-making, adaptation to changing battlefield conditions, and effectiveness against opponents with different capabilities than your own. His forearms gestured expansively. You will be divided into pairs for one-on-one combat scenarios using training weapons calibrated to register hits without causing permanent damage. His upper eyes fixed briefly on Nate. Most of you will be matched against those of similar physical classification to ensure fair assessment. The emphasis on most wasn't subtle. First pairing, Kroll continued, consulting his display. Sergeant Carter and Specialist Zyra. Close quarters combat with standard gravity. Zyra's mandibles clicked in surprise as she glanced at Nate. They both knew this wasn't a random assignment. The aeroplane's speed and precision against the human's unexpected resilience. Kroll was testing hypotheses. They took positions at opposite ends of a confined urban simulation, a maze of corridors and rooms representing a spacecraft interior or station environment. Each was equipped with a training weapon that emitted targeted energy pulses to simulate weapon fire. Begin on the signal, Kroll's voice announced over the comm system. 3, 2, 1. Engage. Zyra disappeared from Nate's view immediately, her species' natural speed allowing her to vanish into the maze of corridors. Nate advanced cautiously, using established tactical movement patterns to minimize exposure while maintaining awareness of potential approach vectors. He knew aeroplanes relied on burst movement, incredible acceleration followed by brief recovery periods. Their exoskeletons provided natural armor, but had neural junction points that were more vulnerable. Earth's intelligence on the species was solid, even if the reverse wasn't true. A blur of movement registered in his peripheral vision. Nate dropped into a defensive crouch as energy pulses streaked through the space where his head had been a split second earlier. He returned fire, not aiming for where Zyra had been, but where her movement pattern would logically take her. A surprise chittering sound confirmed at least a partial hit. Impressive predictive tracking, human, Zyra's voice came from somewhere to his left. Most opponents can't compensate for our speed. Nate didn't respond to the verbal distraction. Instead, he used the sound to triangulate her position and shifted his strategy. Rather than pursuing, he moved to create an ambush scenario, using the environment to funnel her toward a predictable intercept point. The strategy worked. When Zyra darted around the next corner, Nate was waiting. His shots caught her in mid-movement, striking enough neural junction points to register what would have been incapacitating hits in actual combat. Simulation complete, announced the system. Victor, Sergeant Carter. Zyra's compound eyes widened in what Nate had come to recognize as surprise. How did you anticipate that approach vector? The corridor configuration gave me 17 possible routes, but only 3 that maximized your species' movement advantages, Nate explained, helping her up. I would have chosen the same path in your position. Before Zyra could respond, Lieutenant Kroll's voice cut through the arena. Next pairing, Sergeant Carter and Recruit Burke. Variable gravity combat arena. Nate barely had time to process the announcement. 2 consecutive matches was unusual. Clearly, the instructors were pushing him deliberately. The arena reconfigured itself into a more open battlefield with scattered cover and elevation changes. Burke entered from the opposite side, his massive form imposing even at a distance. The Tisanthian carried a heavy training weapon designed to simulate the crushing melee armaments his species favored. Variable gravity protocols engaged, Kroll announced. Gravity will shift randomly between 1G and 4G during the encounter. Adapt or fail. This was no longer even pretending to be standard assessment. It was a deliberate stress test aimed specifically at Nate. From the observation deck, he could see Commandant Ravok watching intently. Begin on the signal. 3, 2, 1. Engage. Immediately, the gravity increased to 2G. Burke charged forward, seemingly unaffected by the change, while Nate adjusted his stance to compensate. The Tisanthian strategy was straightforward. Use superior strength and gravity adaptation to overwhelm the human. Nate had different plans. Instead of retreating or attempting to match strength with strength, he utilized tactical movement to maintain distance, employing his training weapon to target the few vulnerable points in Tisanthian physiology. The gravity shifted again, dropping to 1G. Nate used the sudden lightness to execute a vertical maneuver, leaping to a higher position that gave him better firing angles. Burke's momentum carried him forward, exposing him to several precisely placed shots. First blood to the human, commented an unseen observer. Burke roared in frustration and adjusted his approach, becoming more cautious. The 2 circled each other as gravity fluctuated unpredictably. 3G, 1.5G, 4G. Each change required instant adaptation. During a sudden drop from 3G to 1G, Nate saw his opportunity. The transitional moment, when Burke's body was still compensating for high gravity, created a millisecond of imbalance. Nate launched himself forward, firing a rapid sequence of shots at the Tisanthian's nerve clusters while simultaneously evading the sweeping arc of Burke's weapon. But Burke was an experienced fighter. Even off balance, he managed to clip Nate with a glancing blow that would have shattered ordinary human bones. Nate rolled with the impact, his reinforced skeleton absorbing punishment that would have hospitalized most Earth soldiers. As gravity ramped back up to 4G, both combatants found themselves in close quarters, exactly where Burke's advantages were greatest. The crushing force pressed down as the Tisanthian moved to finish the fight. What happened next stunned even the instructors. Instead of weakening under the extreme gravity, Nate seemed to draw energy from it. His movements became more focused, more precise, as if the pressure had distilled his combat effectiveness into something extraordinary. He slipped inside Burke's guard, targeting nerve junctions with surgical precision. The Tisanthian faltered, his movements becoming uncoordinated as the simulated attacks registered on his nervous system. In a final decisive sequence, Nate executed a combination that leveraged the high gravity rather than fighting against it. Using Burke's own momentum and the downward force, he maneuvered the much larger opponent into a compromised position and delivered the equivalent of a finishing strike. "Simulation complete," announced the system. "Victor, Sergeant Carter." The gravity returned to standard as medics moved in to check both combatants. Burke lay stunned, more from surprise than injury, while Nate stood breathing heavily but still combat-ready. The arena fell silent. What they had just witnessed defied conventional understanding of human capabilities. The Tasanthian, evolved over millions of years for high-gravity combat, had been defeated by a supposedly inferior species in his own element. Nate extended a hand to Burke. After a moment's hesitation, the Tasanthian accepted it, allowing the human to help him to his feet despite the absurdity of the smaller being assisting the larger. "You fight?" Unexpectedly, Burke acknowledged, his rumbling voice quieter than usual. "So do you," Nate replied with genuine respect. "Best opponent I've faced." From the observation deck, Commandant Ravok turned to Lieutenant Kroll. "I believe we need to update our files on human combat capabilities," he said quietly, "and perhaps reconsider their classification in our system." Kroll nodded wordlessly, his four eyes fixed on the human who had shattered their preconceptions. The arena emptied slowly, recruits and instructors alike processing what they'd witnessed. Nate returned to his quarters, aware that today had changed the trajectory of his mission. He had revealed more than intended, but the diplomatic impact would likely outweigh the intelligence concerns. His console chimed as he entered his room, still set at 3G, which now felt almost comfortable. A message from Earth Command, heavily encrypted. Performance noted. Tactical reassessment in progress. Continue mission parameters with adjusted protocols. Phase 2 authorization granted. So they were watching. Of course they were. This hadn't been just his performance, but humanity's debut on a new stage. Nate smiled slightly as he began his recovery exercises. The gravity of the situation, literal and figurative, was not lost on him. In the days that followed, the Academy's atmosphere changed subtly. Where once there had been dismissive glances and veiled contempt toward the human recruit, now there was cautious reassessment. Some, like Zyra, sought him out for training insights. Others, including Burke, maintained distance but with newfound respect. The instructors, meanwhile, subjected Nate to increasingly complex scenarios, combining environmental challenges with tactical puzzles and combat simulations. He met each with the same methodical competence, revealing enough to maintain his credibility without exposing Earth's full military capabilities. Lieutenant Kroll, whose initial joke had inadvertently sparked this revelation, found himself in the awkward position of having to officially recognize Nate's accomplishments. During a particularly challenging underwater combat exercise, where Nate's specialized lung modifications allowed him to outperform species with natural aquatic adaptations, Kroll grudgingly awarded him the highest performance rating. "It seems humans have hidden depths," the lieutenant remarked, not quite apologetically. "We adapt," Nate replied simply. 3 weeks into the training cycle, Commandant Ravok called an unprecedented assembly. The central atrium filled once again with recruits and instructors, speculation buzzing through the crowd. "Recent performances have necessitated a special assessment opportunity," Ravok announced without preamble. "Tomorrow, we will conduct an elite combat trial in the gravity arena. Voluntary participation, open to all recruits who believe they can demonstrate exceptional combat proficiency under extreme conditions." His gaze settled on Nate. The gravity arena allows for real-time manipulation of environmental forces, creating a truly dynamic battlefield. Forces will fluctuate between 1G and 4G without warning patterns. Only those with superior adaptation capabilities should consider participating. The message couldn't have been clearer if it had been addressed to Nate by name. "Participation is not mandatory," Ravok continued, "but those who excel will be noted in permanent academy records, with implications for future assignments and advancement opportunities." The assembly dismissed, Recruits immediately clustered into animated discussion groups. Nate found himself approached by both Zyra and Renu, the morphoplasm. "You're participating, of course," Zyra stated rather than asked, her mandibles clicking with excitement. "Deliberating," Nate replied, though they all knew it was a formality. After his previous performances, declining would raise more questions than participating. "Burke has already registered," Renu informed them, its gelatinous form rippling with what might have been anticipation. "He's been training at 3.5 G since your combat exercise. Says he won't be caught unprepared again." That was interesting. The Tesanthians' response wasn't resentment, but adaptation. Exactly what humanity itself had done on a larger scale. "Who else?" Nate asked. "About 12 recruits so far," Zyra answered. "Mostly heavy worlders and a few with special adaptations." Her compound eyes glittered. "No one thinks any non-Tesanthians stand a chance in the high-gravity segments, except maybe you." Nate nodded thoughtfully. "What about you two?" Renu's body wobbled in what Nate had come to recognize as their equivalent of a shrug. "My species has advantages in variable gravity. We can partially redistribute our mass. Not enough to win against specialists like you or Burke, but enough to make a respectable showing." "I'm faster than anyone here," Zyra said without false modesty, "but sustained high G reduces that advantage. I'll participate to show aeroplan adaptability, but my strategy is to dominate the low-gravity phases and survive the high ones." As they talked, Nate noticed Lieutenant Kroll observing them from across the atrium, all four eyes narrowed in assessment. The lieutenant's initial contempt had evolved into something more complex, a mixture of reluctant respect and lingering suspicion. That night, alone in his 3G quarters, Nate sent a heavily encrypted message to Earth Command. "Elite combat trial tomorrow. High visibility. Request performance parameters." The response came within minutes. "Demonstrate sufficient capability to earn respect without revealing full capacity. Authorization for enhanced performance up to 80% of actual capability. Maintain plausible physiological narrative." In other words, win impressively, but make it look difficult. Don't reveal everything humanity could do. The balancing act continued. Nate spent the night in careful preparation, mentally reviewing combat techniques optimized for variable gravity while his body acclimated to the sustained 3G environment of his quarters. He knew his performance tomorrow would have ramifications beyond personal achievement. It would influence galactic perception of Earth for years to come. The gravity arena was unlike any training facility Nate had seen before. A massive spherical chamber with modular terrain elements that could be reconfigured in real time. It featured a central control hub where technicians monitored and adjusted environmental conditions. Surrounding the sphere was a transparent observation deck already filling with Academy personnel and even a few external observers, diplomatic representatives, and military attaches from various worlds, including Earth. The 16 participants assembled near the arena entrance. Besides Nate, Burke, Zyra, and Renu, there were representatives from 12 other species, each with unique adaptations or natural advantages in variable gravity environments. Most were from heavy world species like the Tesanthians, though a few, like Zyra, were betting on speed and agility in the low-gravity phases. Commandant Ravok addressed them from a hovering platform. "Today's elite combat trial will test not just strength or speed, but adaptive capability, the true measure of an elite warrior. The gravitational field will shift unpredictably between 1G and 4G. Terrain will reconfigure. Randomly, combat will be 16-way, with eliminations occurring until only one remains." He gestured to the weapon racks beside them. Training weapons are calibrated to register disabling hits without causing permanent damage. 3 registered hits results in elimination. Choose your loadout according to your combat style and physiological advantages. Nate selected equipment that complemented human versatility. A medium-range energy weapon similar to Earth tactical rifles, a sidearm for close encounters, and minimal defensive gear to maintain mobility. Burke opted for heavier weaponry and armor, clearly planning to dominate in high-gravity phases when others would be compromised. Zyra chose lightweight, rapid-fire weapons optimized for her speed, while Rinu's amorphous physiology allowed for integrated weapon systems that became part of their fluid form. Enter the arena, Reva commanded. Positions will be randomized. Combat begins on the signal. The interior of the sphere was even more impressive up close. Modular terrain elements floated in null-gravity pockets, ready to be repositioned by the arena's systems. Gravity plating in the floor, walls, and ceiling could activate in various combinations to change the effective direction of down, as well as the intensity of gravitational pull. Nate found himself positioned on a raised platform near one edge of the arena. The artificial gravity felt normal, standard Earth gravity, but he knew that would change rapidly once the trial began. Across the chamber, he could see Burke on a similar elevation, the Tesanthian's rocky features set in grim determination. Elite combat, trial commencing in 10 seconds, announced an automated voice. 9, 8. Nate centered himself, controlled his breathing, recalled his training. This wasn't just combat. It was diplomacy through demonstration. Controlled revelation of capability. 3, 2, 1. Kumos. Gravity immediately shifted to 2G, pressing down with twice Earth's normal force. Simultaneously, terrain elements began moving, some platforms rising, others descending, creating a constantly evolving battlefield. Several participants were caught off guard by the sudden change, their movements becoming labored. Others, including Burke and Nate, had clearly anticipated the opening gambit and compensated efficiently. The arena erupted into chaos as 16 elite warriors engaged simultaneously. Energy weapons discharged, illuminating the chamber with multicolored pulses. A Kelvaki recruit, evolved for low-gravity environments, was eliminated within the first minute, unable to maneuver effectively under double gravity. Nate implemented his strategy: observe, adapt, engage selectively. He used terrain for cover while tracking opponent positions and movement patterns. His first elimination came when a serpentine Drallet attempted to flank his position but underestimated human reaction speed. The gravity shifted suddenly to 1G, then to 3G within seconds. The rapid transition created momentary disorientation among most combatants, a critical window for those who could adapt fastest. Zyra used the low-gravity moment to execute an impressive series of maneuvers, eliminating 2 opponents with precisely placed shots before finding cover as gravity increased again. Her exoskeleton gleamed under the arena lights as she moved with extraordinary precision. Burke was methodically clearing his section of the arena, the heavy gravity seeming to energize rather than hinder him. His massive form moved with surprising grace for something so substantial, each movement conserving energy while maximizing impact. Rinu's fluid body adapted to gravitational changes by altering density, becoming more diffuse in high gravity and more concentrated in low. The morphoplasm eliminated a heavily armored opponent by flowing into gaps in their defense and solidifying at critical junction points. The battle continued for nearly 20 minutes, with eliminations occurring regularly as fatigue and gravitational stress took their toll. The terrain reconfigured constantly, forcing participants to adapt not just to changing gravity, but also to an evolving battlefield. When the field narrowed to 6 remaining combatants, the arena controllers implemented a new challenge: sectional gravity. Different portions of the chamber now experienced different gravitational forces simultaneously, with visible boundary lines marking transitions between zones. Nate found himself in a 3G sector adjacent to a 1G zone. The tactical implications were immediate. Crossing the boundary would require instant physiological adjustment. He used the boundary as a defensive position, carefully timing his movements to leverage the gravitational differential against pursuers. Another elimination. 5 remaining. 4. The final 4: Nate, Burke, Zyra, and a Helveti with remarkable gravitational adaptation organs converged toward the center of the arena as the act of combat. zone gradually contracted. The observation deck fell silent, spectators transfixed by the display of elite combat skill. Gravity shifted to 4G across the entire arena. Maximum force. Zyra stumbled, her lightweight physiology disadvantaged under extreme pressure. The Helvetii seized the opportunity, targeting her with a barrage of suppressing fire. Nate saw her predicament, but was engaged with Burke, the two locked in a high-stakes positioning battle across a series of elevated platforms. In the split second before the Helvetii could eliminate Zyra, gravity reversed completely, 1G, but inverted. Down was suddenly the ceiling. Everyone except Renu, who had already been eliminated, was caught off guard. Bodies plummeted toward what had been the ceiling. Zyra recovered fastest, her aeroplan reflexes allowing her to twist mid-air and land on her feet on an inverted platform. The Helvetii wasn't as fortunate. They impacted awkwardly, exposing their position to Zyra's counterattack. 3 remaining, Nate, Burke, and Zyra. The gravity normalized to 2G, then began fluctuating in waves, pulses of force that rolled across the arena like oceanic swells. Timing movement with these waves became critical to maintaining combat effectiveness. Burke and Zyra engaged directly, their contrasting styles, raw power versus blinding speed, creating a spectacular exchange. Nate used their distraction to maneuver into an advantageous position, waiting for the perfect moment to engage. That moment came when gravity spiked unexpectedly to 4G during an exchange between Burke and Zyra. The aeroplan, already committed to an aerial maneuver, couldn't adjust in time. She took a glancing hit from Burke that registered as her final elimination. 2 remained. The arena reconfigured dramatically, eliminating most cover and creating a circular central platform surrounded by gravitational dead zone. Nate and Burke faced each other across this final battlefield as gravity stabilized at 3G, heavy enough to challenge but not incapacitate. The human and the Tisanthian, Burke rumbled, his stone-like features set in grim determination. As it should be. Good fight, Nate acknowledged, adjusting his stance to optimize for the current conditions. Not finished yet, Burke replied, raising his weapon. What followed was a masterclass in adaptive combat. Both warriors had been carefully conserving energy for this final confrontation, and both revealed capabilities they'd previously kept in reserve. Burke's raw strength was phenomenal, each movement carrying devastating momentum. Yet Nate matched him with precision and tactical awareness that seemed to anticipate the Tisanthian's actions. The gravity shifted again, 4G, maximum force. Both combatants adjusted, but where Burke seemed to gain power from the crushing pressure, Nate's movements became more economical, more focused. He had trained for this, prepared for this moment with a lifetime of specialized conditioning. In the observation deck, Commandant Ravok leaned forward intently. Remarkable adaptation from both, he murmured to Lieutenant Kroll. But watch the human's technique. It's not just physical conditioning. There's specialized training at work. Kroll's 4 eyes narrowed in analysis. His movement patterns change with each gravity shift. Not just compensation, but complete stylistic adaptation. The duel reached its climax when gravity suddenly dropped to 1G. Both warriors had been braced for crushing force, and the sudden release created a moment of opportunity. Nate reacted a fraction of a second faster, executing a combination move that utilized momentum from the gravitational shift. 3 rapid shots, precisely placed. The third caught Burke at a vulnerable junction, registering as a final elimination hit. Combat complete, announced the system. Victor, Sergeant Nathan Carter. The arena fell silent. Then, from the observation deck, applause began, tentative at first, then building to enthusiastic recognition. Recruits, instructors, and even visiting dignitaries acknowledged what they had witnessed, an extraordinary demonstration of combat adaptation from an allegedly inferior species. Nate extended his hand to Burke, a human gesture of respect that the Tisanthian understood. Their grasp, human and stone-like, symbolized more than personal respect. It represented a reevaluation of assumptions. You fight like one born on a heavy world, Burke acknowledged. Your people have been misrepresented in our data, as have many species, I suspect, Nate replied. Maybe that's part of what we're all learning here. As they exited the arena together, the implications of the day's events were already rippling through the academy. Commandant Ravok met them at the exit, his obsidian features unreadable, but his posture conveying unmistakable respect. Impressive performance, both of you, he stated formally. Sergeant Carter, the gravity arena's monitoring systems recorded physiological data during combat. Your adaptation to 4G conditions exceeds anything in our existing files on human capabilities. Nate maintained a neutral expression. Earth's training programs are constantly evolving, Commandant. Evidently, Ravok studied him with renewed interest. I believe our assessment of human military classification requires significant revision. And there it was, the diplomatic breakthrough that had been Earth's true objective all along. Not to intimidate through displays of overwhelming force, but to earn reconsideration through demonstrated capability. In the days that followed, Nate noticed subtle but significant changes in the Academy's approach to him and, by extension, to humanity. Training regimens were adjusted to reflect his demonstrated capabilities. Lieutenant Kroll, who had begun this journey with a gravity joke, now assigned Nate to lead tactical exercises for mixed-species squads. Most telling was an encrypted message from Earth Command that arrived 1 week after the Gravity Arena trial. Classification review initiated by Galactic Council. Earth provisional upgrade to Class B military status pending formal assessment. Mission objective achieved. Continue integration protocols. The joke that had doubled Nate's quarter's gravity had cascaded into a fundamental reassessment of humanity's place in the galactic order. From overlooked curiosity to respected potential ally, all because he had asked for triple when they doubled. On the final day of the training cycle, the Academy held its graduation ceremony in the central atrium. The assembled recruits stood in formation as Commandant Ravok addressed them. You came here as representatives of your worlds, he stated, his voice carrying throughout the vast chamber. You leave as representatives of this academy, warriors who have proven your adaptability, your resilience, and your capacity to exceed expectations. His gaze passed over the formation, lingering momentarily on Nate. Some of you have demonstrated capabilities that challenge our preconceptions. This is the true purpose of the Galactic Combat Academy, not merely to train according to established parameters, but to discover new potential, to reconsider what we thought we knew. As the ceremony concluded, recruits were presented with graduation insignia by Academy leadership. When Nate's turn came, it was Commandant Ravok himself who performed the honor. Sergeant Carter, he said, attaching the insignia to Nate's uniform. Your performance here has been illuminating. I have recommended to the Galactic Council that human military capabilities be formally reassessed based on the standards you've demonstrated. Thank you, Commandant, Nate replied. Though I'm just one soldier. Perhaps, Ravok acknowledged with what might have been the ghost of a smile. But one soldier can change perceptions. And perception, Sergeant, often precedes reality in matters of galactic diplomacy. After the ceremony, as recruits prepared for departure to their respective worlds, Nate found himself approached by several of his classmates. Zyra, Renu, and even Burke came to bid farewell, not with the condescension that had marked their early interactions, but with genuine respect. Your people will be sending more recruits to future classes? Burke inquired. I believe that's the plan, Nate confirmed. The Tesanthian nodded approvingly. Good. They will find the gravity settings appropriately challenging. As Nate boarded the transport that would begin his journey back to Earth, he received one final message from Lieutenant Kroll. Your quarters have been reset to standard gravity for the next occupant, though I suspect our next human recruit may find that insufficient. Nate smiled slightly as he composed his reply. Suggest starting them at 2G. We adapt quickly. The transport detached from the Academy's docking bay, beginning its journey through the void. From his viewport, Nate watched the massive structure recede into the distance. No longer an imposing symbol of galactic hierarchy, but a milestone in humanity's journey toward full integration with the wider universe. In his personal quarters aboard the transport, Nate made one adjustment before beginning his mission debriefing. He set the gravity to 3G. It felt like home now. The end.